It really has to start with understanding what the purpose of your workplace is. Your employees should have an answer that just rolls off the tongue. I think there's now a heightened appreciation for aesthetics. You just see more human touches. We haven't seen seismic change in the way that workplaces are being physically built out. That is part of the problem. Never have we ever had this opportunity. Employees are demanding more from their workplaces. You're constantly trying to make sure it's as best it can possibly be. We're anticipating your needs before you have to come and tell us what they are. You should be delivering a great experience for them. We're all kind of looking for that mover and shaker. I thought that was so exciting in a way that he was like, no, push a little harder. It's culture first. That's what's helping them to attract talent. I would say the number one determinant of a successful workplace is how present leadership is. What keeps employees coming back is other people. Everyone wants to deliver a best-in-class workplace experience, and they'll probably say that that's an aspiration. But when you look at where workplace experience can sometimes fall on a list of companies' priorities, it doesn't always make the top 10.
A few short years ago, we had a once-in-a-generation opportunity to rethink the workplace. But instead of bold reinvention, most companies hit snooze. Same spaces, same thinking, just fewer days in the office. What if we didn't waste the moment? What if the workplace became a living lab, constantly experimenting and evolving to meet the needs of the people in it? In this episode, I'm joined by Lauren Hasson, Vice President of Workplace Strategy at JLL. Lauren blends strategy, design, and behavioral insight to help clients move beyond the standard check-the-box office solutions. She's a sharp thinker, a straight shooter, and a big believer that experimentation is the missing link in workplace transformation. Welcome to What the F is Happening to the Office, a conversation about the shifts redefining how and where we work. We invite the experts who are challenging assumptions, experimenting with bold ideas, and reshaping the future of work. And if you're designing, building, managing, or just trying to make sense of what's next for the workplace, we invite you to be a part of the conversation. Follow along, share your thoughts, and help us to reimagine what the office could be. I'm Bob Fox, founder of Work Design. Lauren, welcome. This is a topic close to my heart, so I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Very excited to be here.
Lauren, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing?
Yeah, so my background is actually a little bit atypical for the world of workplace strategy. I blend social science and a passion for health and well-being with all of the exposure and expertise that I've had in the world of real estate and workplace. So I'm very focused on the human experience at work and how we can really design the best workplaces that help people to feel healthier and achieve their highest potential when they're in the office.
If you could define how you think about workplace strategy.
Sure. The way I think about workplace strategy is it's the user experience of the office. So similar to how UX designers are focused on somebody's interaction with a website, I'm focused on a user's interaction with their office, the built environment. And then there's also this layer of the culture, the values, the ethos of a workplace that has to bring that built environment alive. So I think the magic of workplace strategy is how you bring those two things together, the built environment and then the human factors that make it come to life.
We talked a little bit about the change that has been occurring in the workplace. Why don't you describe what you actually see post-pandemic relative to the opportunity that we had?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of said it in the intro there, Bob, too, of like, man, did we miss the moment? It's that Winston Churchill quote of never waste a good crisis. And I think at the height of the pandemic, we were all so optimistic that we were going to see seismic change in the way that we designed offices. And never have we ever had this opportunity to take blank space, empty space, and completely turn it on its head to bring people back and entice them with new and different ways of working. But unfortunately, we didn't see that seismic shift. I mean, I try to not get too bummed out about it, but, I do worry that maybe we did waste the crisis. But on the other hand, I can appreciate why people needed to cling to something that felt familiar in a moment when so much of our lives was in flux. So I can appreciate why the change didn't happen, but I'm somebody who gets really excited by change. So I was sitting there, just hoping for something totally different to emerge as a result of the pandemic. And we really haven't seen that. I think what we have seen is a higher standard of workplace experience. Employees are demanding more from their workplaces. So that's good. But are we really truly designing spaces in a completely different way? No, we're not yet.
I kind of feel the same. I feel like we had this incredible opportunity, but we stepped back, kicked everybody out of the office, and then you'd think that we would start with something different, something new, but that didn't really happen. When we talked earlier, you mentioned sending a survey out to about 250 workplace professionals and asking for examples of radical innovation. What did you get back from that?
We didn't get a ton of feedback, which I was disappointed by because I thought, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm only working with a certain cadre of clients that are still kind of stuck in their ways. And maybe I have blind spots here that the rest of the industry can open my eyes to. And in fact, it feels like the vantage point that I'm sitting at is very much the vantage point that other experts in our industry are sitting at as well, which is we're all kind of looking for that mover and shaker. We're looking to share an example of a company that is totally disruptive, but there are very, very few of them, is the reality.
Yeah, I think there's also a lot of companies that work in a secretive mode where they don't share what they're doing. And I'm curious how you look at that and if there are things that we can learn from that.
What's interesting is a lot of the companies that are fully remote or fully flexible are the ones that have taken the biggest risks. And in some cases, because they don't have the same office presence, there might be a little bit of that secretive nature because you just don't have as many boots on the ground to tell you what's happening in their workplaces. But on occasion, there's a handful of tech companies that have been very public about what they've done with their workplace design, even if they are virtual first or fully remote. So the examples are out there. I think the secrecy is understandable because people, if they have something that is that secret sauce, they don't necessarily want to give it out to their competition. But I think, thankfully, there are, 3 to 5 companies that I can think of that have been very public in sharing what they're doing to create great workplace experience. And I know a lot of our clients are looking to those companies for inspiration.
What do you see that holds companies back that, sort of prevents them from experimenting or trying something new?
Well, I think coming out of the pandemic, there's this feeling of let's not introduce any more disruption than we have to. Like a lot of companies feel that in 2025, they are finally reaching that point of homeostasis again. And they're getting people to show up to the office more often, maybe because there's a mandate or maybe it's just happening organically. But I think leaders across the board feel like, why would we upset the apple cart right now if we're finally back in a good place that has been such a struggle to get to, especially in markets like New England, where return to office was a lot slower than other parts of the country. So I think that's a huge reason why. There's also sometimes this disconnect between what companies say they're going to do and what they actually end up doing. And I think it's, again, there's so much happening right now in our world geopolitically and economically that everyone wants to deliver a best in class workplace experience, and they'll probably say that that's an aspiration. But when you look at where workplace experience can sometimes fall on a list of companies' priorities, it doesn't always make the top 10. And that's just a reality that is true. And I think that's true across industries. It's not like we can point to one industry or one type of company and say, oh, they don't care about workplace experience. I think it's a challenge for everybody to get that into the top 10, but I believe it should be there. And I think that there's this direct connection between really thoughtful workplace experience that has been planned and invested in and staffed and curated and the performance of a company. I think there is a direct link there, but sometimes it's hard to make that case of the ROI on making that investment in your workplace.
Well, and I think you and I would both probably prefer to see the work environment be this very attractive, healthy place that people like to go to. But it's almost as if mandates take priority over the great work environment.
I know. Yeah. And really, the two are so linked. Like, if you're going to ask people to be on site 3 to 4 days a week, you should be delivering a great experience for them that's going to unlock their highest potential in performance. You can't just expect that because people are back in the office, all of a sudden you're going to see results that you've never seen before. It's not as simple as that. The space still matters.
I know one of the things close to your heart is creating these labs or experimenting in the workplace. I mean, can you describe what that would look like for an organization, and what's the mind shift that needs to take place?
Yeah. I mean, I think of workplace experience managers or workplace strategy leaders as scientists within the workplace, or at least that's the mindset I would encourage more people in those positions to have, because you have to constantly stay curious about how effective your workplace is and if it's really delivering what you expect of it. I think a lot of times what happens is that people sign a 10-year lease, they build it out for that 10-year period, and they really don't think about it again until they're 7 or 8 years into that 10-year lease. I think personally, and I get that this is asking a lot of people who already have very full plates in these roles that I've just mentioned, but I think that you should always have this mindset of curiosity and wanting to test and learn. So, my dream is that I would go to any company that we're partnered with at JLL who has some sort of real estate need or workplace need or facilities need. And on the day that I show up for them to give me a tour, I would say, the very first thing I want to see is your lab. Take me to your lab. And regardless of the industry, the size of the company, they would say, oh, sure, come with me. And maybe that lab is a room where you're testing two different types of workstation setups. If you can imagine a mock up, but it's like this living mock up that's always there. And maybe one month you're testing workstations, another month you're testing an open collaboration setup. And then maybe if it's not that room, it's a neighborhood where you say, well, actually, this month our lab is over in the HR zone because we're testing this different type of phone booth to see if our HR business partners are more comfortable in one type of phone booth over another for confidential calls that they're taking. So, this mindset of always having a lab in the office, I just think is so powerful because it communicates to your employees that you're never satisfied. We're always trying to do better for you. We're always trying to study your needs and make sure that we're anticipating your needs before you have to come and tell us what they are. And it also says that it is the workplace experience is in that top 10 for your organization. That if you're asking people to be on site, you're constantly trying to make sure it's as best it can possibly be.
I would think business is a competitive thing that you're trying to improve the performance of your company. You're also trying to attract the best talent. So, what are some practical suggestions that you could offer to help people create these environments?
Yeah. I mean, I think the number one thing you can deliver that's going to make your current employees and your future employees who you're trying to attract happy is choice. The very last thing somebody wants is a feeling of being chained to a workstation for 8 to 10 hours a day. I mean, none of us will perform at our best if that's our only option. I think there's a lot of conversation now in the architecture and design world about designing for neurodiversities in the workplace. And one of the best ways that you can do that is providing choices. Does somebody want to go sit in the work cafe for their afternoon because they get energy from being around other people? Do you have different sizes of meeting rooms or different enclaves with varying levels of privacy? Like, choice is the number one thing that you can deliver that will pay dividends for many years to come. And so having a diversity of settings for people to go through throughout their day is the most valuable thing. That is the hottest tip I could give you. It's choice, choice, choice. And I will say that that's challenging from a real estate standpoint because a lot of the initial calculations that go into somebody's perspective on how much space they need for the next 10 years is born out of a simple RSF per employee calculation. And what I find is that people tend to use an RSF per seat instead of an RSF per person. Those are two very different metrics. Per seat is usually talking about somebody's individual footprint at a workstation or in a private office. Per person then brings in a portion of all the shared spaces that people have access to throughout their day. So, something that I have found is the bigger the company, the more shared space they have, the bigger that RSF per person number gets. So as you're planning your next lease, your next office, make sure that you're not reducing it to that RSF per seat number. Make sure it's an RSF per person, and you're thinking about all the shared environments that somebody could cycle through in a given workday because you're delivering that choice.
We'll come back and talk about some of the metrics to measure this. But
Okay.
let me ask you, in terms of the choice that you talked about, looking at like a comparative analysis between different types of space, do you see any companies that are doing that, organizations that are doing that to try to improve the quality of their environment?
Absolutely. I think that's the number one thing that has evolved in the past few years is that there is more of an emphasis on places for people to meet, socialize, gather, learn, train. Those environments have a premium on them. And I think more companies are delivering those spaces in 2025 than they were in 2019. So that's exciting because I think it's showing that leaders are tuned into the fact that people want to participate in certain types of activities when you're in the office, and usually it's some varying degree of collaboration that is what's enticing people to come back.
There's a big social component that's
Yeah.
a part of the workplace. How are you seeing that influence the way that the space is being designed?
One of the first things that we try to support our clients on is defining what the purpose of their workplace is, and I would say the vast majority of our conversations land on socializing being in, the top 3 requirements of what leaders wanna see happening in their new workplaces. So, yeah, it's right up there. I mean, I think most companies have realized that on Mondays and Fridays, you can ask people to do their heads down work at home. Tuesday through Thursday, you want to see people having those innovative meetings, they're whiteboarding, you want to see them celebrating things, baby showers, retirements. You want to see them having lunch together. Like that middle core part of your week is when you're really capitalizing on all that time with one another. You don't want to see people just sitting at their desks with headphones on.
There's, I guess, a lot of tools that are coming into the work environment now, everything from apps and sensors. How are you seeing companies actually making use of this data, and how does it influence their work environment?
Honestly, I wish there was more of it. I think there still is some hesitation for folks around a big brother factor that isn't really there with sensors in particular. So I understand that there's a cost associated with censoring your workplace, and depending upon how big it is, that can be a cause for concern. But I really get bummed out when you get to a point where you've made the business case, the funding is there, and what ends up keeping the sensor planning from coming to fruition is this concern about privacy. And I think what's exciting about the world of sensor and workplace technology today is that there are so many options out there that really have proven they are anonymous. And now we just need to get more. We need to like hit that tipping point that we haven't quite hit yet of enough people censoring their workplace that it just becomes the standard. It becomes an expectation, maybe at a certain size, like maybe for a workplace that's 20,000 square feet or greater, that would just be, of course, you have sensors in your workplace if that's the amount of space that you're managing. Why wouldn't you want that data? Like we're not quite there yet, but I'm still optimistic that we'll get there in the future because I'm seeing absolutely an emphasis on data informing the real estate conversation early on when someone's preparing to sign their next lease.
Yeah, I'm curious, what types of data do you see that people are using the most, and how is that influencing or shaping the work environment today?
Yeah, I mean, the default is badge data because pretty much everybody has it. And so, that's 9 times out of 10 what we're using to tell a utilization story that informs the next real estate decision. If you get lucky, sometimes you layer that in with badge data or VPN data to give you a little bit more precision around the types of spaces that people are using. Because in my mind, it's not enough to just know that people came in to the office. I want to know when they were in the office, where were they? Where did they spend most of the day? And where are you having these capacity issues? Because let's make sure that when you're signing your next lease and you're building out that space that you don't have those same pressure points, that we can provide some relief for those in demand spaces.
I don't know if you're seeing this, but I feel like most of the apps that are out there that are tracking data are more quantitative, and I haven't seen any really good qualitative measures, that
Hmm.
what's the acoustics of the space? What's the temperature? Is this space got a good view? Things like that that
Yeah,
are still missing from that data.
I agree with you. Yeah, I think there's a need for that.
How about for architects and engineers, that are designing these spaces? Do you have any recommendations for how they should be looking at this data?
You know what's funny is that I had a very savvy head of real estate say that he wishes his architecture partners would challenge him more, and would help him build the case to do something that is a little more controversial in their next build out, or maybe to design that lab environment that it feels sometimes like if you have that global head of real estate that is open minded, that if the architecture partner can help them build the case with data or just with benchmarking to say, hey, other companies are starting to lean in this direction or they're starting to ask questions about this. Do you guys want to be the first to design this type of space within your next office or to approach your next office design with this mindset? So I think, it's interesting. You don't always want to push your clients. You want to sort of respect where they're coming from and honor their vision and advise them to the best of your abilities. But I thought that was so exciting in a way that he was like, no, push a little harder, help me build that case, like help me take it to my leadership team. So
Yeah, that's great. You talked about choice earlier, but I think one of the other things that emerged out of the pandemic was flexibility. And I think one of the challenges in designing some of these new spaces because there's not a lot of data that dictates how to increase the flexibility of a work environment.
yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, we have seen tremendous demand for modularity in terms of walls and furniture and power placement. And yeah, especially if people are delivering some sort of great meeting and events or meeting and training space, like it's got to be modular. And I think that's even showing up too in different lease terms where clients are asking questions about expansion rights and conferencing centers within the building and how long they'll have access to those and if it matches the term of their lease. So there's definitely a lot more conversation happening about flexibility in all ways today.
I think that a lot of the larger organizations are taking advantage of this data and the sensors and apps that are available. But what can smaller companies do to improve the quality of their work environments?
There's no harm in doing an old school utilization study, especially it's the summertime right now. So if you have summer interns and you can have them kind of walk the floors for you and give you some insights into what spaces are getting used or which ones are not used, and maybe invite those interns to help you run some experiments to figure out in the underutilized spaces what you could change to increase the utilization. So technology is wonderful, but I hear your point. Not everybody has the budget for it. And so you can still kind of go back to these old school methodologies and get really good insights that are going to help you to deliver a great experience.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's risen in priority is the more human-centric, people-focused types of experiences that are occurring within space. So what spaces have you seen that feel genuinely people first in the work environment today?
I love that question. I feel like what comes to mind are some of those smaller companies that we were just talking about because it's the smaller, especially tech companies that I see where it's culture first. That's what's helping them to attract talent. Maybe they can't pay what the largest tech players can pay. And so instead of those salaries, they're offering this really dynamic culture. And so you just see more human touches. You see more traces of people in those human centric workplaces where there's photos and there's awards and different artifacts that give you a sense of the culture. And I think even at scale, I see examples of how companies try to carry that through. Like I've worked with this great tech company that has these glass orbs that they created on a team offsite when the company was only 25 people. And every time they move, those glass orbs have a different place in the office. So like right now they're part of a light fixture in the office. But I just think it's important to figure out like what are those little threads that you're going to make sure as your company grows you hold on to what makes the company feel human. You hold on to that startup spirit that you began with.
You talked earlier about square footage per person, and I think that still seems to dominate planning today. And I'm wondering if you're seeing other measures of the space or other measures of workplace performance beginning to emerge, and what do those look like?
Yeah. I think the other metrics that we get requests for often, because not everybody has been tracking their data this way. And so sometimes they'll send it to us so that we can deliver it back to them, is cost per visit, which could be a cost per client visit or a cost per employee visit. And then there's just the round cost per employee that's tagged to that location so that someone can understand how much it costs to have a dedicated desk or how much it would cost to migrate to a hoteling model. And does that save them money to have a 2-to-1 ratio versus a 1-to-1 ratio for employees? And then the last metric that is now folded into this algorithm is the employee engagement score, which I think is fascinating. So people are taking that HR data stream and adding it into the real estate data that are those inputs are pretty typical of the cost per employee, the RSF per employee. So I think that that's really valuable. And it's also why a lot of those remote first companies have continued to maintain a real estate presence around the world in many cases because they're showing that their employee engagement scores are still really high even though they're only bringing people together in their space maybe a few times a year.
I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of the return to office. It seems like 3 days a week is still the standard, but I think you're seeing more people coming back into the office now, at least for, social interactions or meetings or things like that. So I'm curious what you're seeing out there in terms of, how people are interacting with that space.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's 3 days a week is still the national average. I think that the Fortune 50 and the Fortune 100 slants a little higher than that because a lot of the big banks and big tech companies have dialed up their requirements even more. And I think this is just my prediction. I don't have a crystal ball, but just based on what we're seeing, I do believe that this is the new normal. We might see incremental change upwards where we go from 3 days is the average to 3.5 days, or maybe 3.75 days is the average. But I do think that this is the new normal. I think we're going to see it stabilize. And I think that Fridays, which right now are the lowest utilization day of the week, will probably continue to be the lowest utilization day of the week. But also, that was true pre pandemic.
There was a lot of talk about mandates a while ago, but it's kind of gone quiet now. I mean, you still seeing organizations issue mandates to get people back to the office?
Yes. And so what's tough about that is I think the word mandate turns a lot of people off. And what I hope doesn't happen is it can't turn you away from the need to have an approach to work. You don't have to call it a mandate. In fact, you might not want to call it a mandate, but everybody needs to add that chapter to their employee handbook if they have not already that outlines how, when, and where work happens at their company. You have to be able to answer that for people, whether it's a mandate or an approach to work or a vision for work, whatever you want to call it. You still have to have an answer for that that's consistent and clear so that if any of your employees were at a barbecue this weekend and somebody said, "Oh, are you working from home or do you go into the office?" Your employee should have an answer that just rolls off the tongue, that's clear and concise.
Have you seen any organizations use any sort of unique, I'll call them incentives, to get people back to the office?
Oh my gosh. I mean, there was everything and the kitchen sink, in the earliest years, like 2022, 2023, it was everything. And we saw gelato parties, like bring your pet to work. We saw, I mean, pickleball tournaments. It just like the whole gamut. You couldn't have dreamt up some of these parties and events that were happening. Yeah, it was really I think that's something that we'll write about in the history books is all the things that we did, all the carrots, so to speak, that companies came up with to entice people back.
How about when it comes to the buildings or the work environment? Are there amenities that stand out that are more important or help to serve the individual as opposed to others?
Yes, and actually we did a study to that effect to really get our arms around what building level amenities do employees value the most, and we found that it was food, fitness, and meeting space. So having the ability to just quickly grab a healthy lunch, maybe do a before work or a midday workout, and then having conference and meeting space so that when you bring employees together, it's not happening at a hotel ballroom, it's just right downstairs and it's, still a secure environment for your employees.
How about when you look at the data across the country, do you see big variations, in different cities and how people are returning to the office or using that space?
Yes, there's been variation in terms of the return to office patterns, but not so much in the amenities study that I just mentioned. That was actually a national study that we did. So the food, the fitness, the meeting space, that's true nationally of what employees value from the building level amenities experience.
And what about, do you see variations in occupancy across the country?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think New England and sort of the Bay Area, we were a little bit slower to return to office than some other parts of the country, but we've now sort of matched our pre pandemic levels, which is really exciting, for those of us that love being at work and are in this industry. But, for a while there, we were sort of the laggards, and now we have caught up. I mean, New York feels very much like pre-pandemic as well, which, for a little while they were lagging, and then whoop, it felt like last year all of a sudden there was just a spike in utilization.
Yeah. How about what are the things that are holding people back, still holding people back from returning to the office? Or do you see any patterns there?
I think it actually links back to what we were just talking about as far as having a clear approach to work. What I find if, we get into conversation with a company that says we're really struggling with return to office, and then I'll ask, well, what's your approach? And they say, well, we let employees choose, and we've sort of recommended that they come back 1 to 2 days a week or 2 to 3 days a week. I'll usually say, like, that's probably where your problem lies, because what keeps employees coming back is other people. That is the number one amenity. That's not new news. I think that's understood at this point. But if that's true, and I believe it is, you have to design a work experience that guarantees your employees will see one another. And so I think that's why at this point, post pandemic, anchor days have become increasingly popular, where you're guaranteeing, let's say your requirement is 3 days in office and you prescribe Tuesdays and Thursdays as anchor days, that everybody's going to be there together on those 2 days. And then odds are they're going to coordinate with each other. And that third day will be probably Wednesday. And you're going to find that there's consistency, because that's really what other people want, is to see their immediate team members and to see leaders, to maybe see people on adjacent teams who they've just been emailing with. So creating some structure for people and ensuring that they will see their colleagues is the best way to guarantee adoption of whatever your approach to work is. And in many cases, if RTO is failing, it's that structure that's missing.
Do you have any suggestions? I'm thinking like with regards to the type of space that
Mm.
necessary to encourage that type of interaction.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's not as simple as if you build it, they will come. It's you have to have great spaces for people, but the space alone isn't going to be the driver of people coming back or people gathering when they are back. I would say the number one determinant of a successful workplace is how present leadership is, and if leadership is modeling the desired behaviors for the spaces that you thoughtfully planned. So I'll hear a lot that, our work cafe isn't well utilized. And then I'll say, well, how often is your leadership in the work cafe? And people will say, like, oh, well, not that often. They tend to just be in their offices. And I'm like, well, that is part of the problem. You probably need to schedule meetings for leadership to have a cup of coffee with somebody in the work cafe, so that's observable to everybody. Or maybe encourage your leaders to eat lunch in the work cafe, even if it's only 30 minutes, because that's demonstrating to everybody else that that's what leadership wants to see. If they themselves are using those spaces, it gives everybody else permission to operate that same way.
I'm curious, in most of these conversations, AI comes up. And in the way that you're working, I'm curious how you see AI beginning to influence the workplace strategy, work that you do.
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is one of the best solutions for all of those data streams that we were talking about a few minutes ago, where you have badge data, VPN data, maybe sensor data, and you're trying to make sense of it all. In some cases, I've seen our clients take those data streams and use AI to generate a point of view on a real estate decision or a workplace decision, whether that's staffing or whether it's changing the design of a room or how a room is furnished. So they're using AI to make sense of the data that they have, because the reality for most of us is that we didn't go to school for data science. And so we have all the information, but we're not always sure how to tell the story with that information. And I think that's where AI can really be ahead of real estate's best friend.
How about in the work that people are that occupy the space are doing? Are you beginning to see technology have an influence on how people work? And is that changing the environment at all?
I would say not yet. I'm hopeful that we'll start to see that in the next few years. We had sort of dreamt up some ideas with a really fun think tank workshop that we did a few months ago. And one of the ideas was like, imagine if you came into a wellness room and the AI could just energize you. So it wasn't the typical wellness room paradigm that most of us have of being a place to get quiet and have some respite. It was like, what if your wellness room is going to play music and give you a scent that you love, like eucalyptus, and maybe there's some sort of lights that come on. by just simply touching a button and saying, I'm Lauren Hasson and I need a boost of energy and I have 10 minutes, go. And then the AI just delivers this multi-sensory experience in that wellness room because it can control all the lights and the scents and the sounds. And that would be amazing. I haven't seen that yet, but I get excited about dreaming up ideas where AI could elevate the workplace experience even more.
Well, I think we're also seeing where it's becoming like your coach. There's an article in the recent Wall Street Journal about relationships with AI.
Yeah,
So I think you're starting to see that aspect begin to emerge. I'm not sure how it's going to play out yet, but I think
I
that'll be
know.
interesting to watch.
Yeah, I agree.
Let me ask you, for a facility manager or an organization that's just starting to think about their next work environment, the next iteration of their work environment, where do they start and what recommendations do you have for them?
I would say it really has to start with understanding what the purpose of your workplace is. And that's not an original thought or statement coming from me. I think that's now become very much the industry standard that you now have to have a different conversation at the start of a real estate planning process than you did a few years ago. I mean, the office used to be a place where, of course, people were going to work 4 to 5 days a week. And that's not always the case anymore. So that's where the conversation has to start is what is the purpose of your workplace? Once you have that, I think you then have to get clear on what your guiding principles are going to be. So, how do you want to manifest your values in this workplace? How are you going to use the workplace to attract and retain talent? How are you going to deliver choice for your employees? So, it's a much more thoughtful process today than I think it was. So, I know we started this conversation by saying we haven't seen seismic change in the way that workplaces are being physically built out. And that's true. But I do think that the planning process has evolved in the past 5 years, and people are a lot more deliberate in the decisions that they're making today than maybe they were pre pandemic.
Well, I think we also learned a lot about the ways people use space. And
Yes.
before we talked about square footage per person, we used to try to pack as many people into the space as we could. And I think, that's evolved now to where I think we're much more sensitive to how people react in certain types of environments. And you talked about the neurodiversity. I think we're creating more options for that. So I'm curious, if you see any other interesting things about how space is evolving, as we look into the future.
Hmm. I think something that's evolving is more appreciation for aesthetics, not because you have to have like a space that's beautiful to photograph and you're going to use that to attract talent, but I think people were able to curate a home office experience for themselves that they were surrounded by the things that they find beautiful or energizing or calming or soothing. And so I think there's now a heightened appreciation for aesthetics and almost like a healthy competition that I get really excited by. I think if you look at some of the photography from recent build outs in and around Boston, they're some of the most beautiful spaces, maybe not the most radically different in terms of the space types, but some of the most beautiful spaces that we've ever seen in, the working world. So that's really exciting. And I hope that trend continues. And I think it's going to help us to deliver something that really does compete with the home office experience.
If you look out into the future, where do you see change occurring? What's sort of the next innovation that you see or you think would be coming down the road in the office environment?
I wish I knew. I think that your question about AI is valid, and I think that AI will reshape the way that we're allocating space. It's possible that we'll need less of a floor plate dedicated to focus work environments because AI is going to relieve us of a lot of that focus work that people felt the need to be heads down for at a workstation. Perhaps that's one of the shifts that we see is that AI transforms the office into even more of a collaborative place than what it is today. Because I think we're still seeing a lot of private offices and workstations in 2025 build outs.
One of the things that we haven't talked about is sustainability. And I'm curious how you see that being factored into the workplace today.
I appreciate the fact that sustainability has almost become table stakes. Like, in some cases, people feel that it's not as much part of the conversation, or maybe it's not as much of a driver in a real estate decision making process. But then when you go and you tour a client through a number of buildings, you see, the LEED and the WELL certification in the building. So it's almost like developers are understanding that that's, of course, something that tenants are looking for. And so it's happening, even if it's not the number one thing that tenants are asking about when they're out touring the market. It's a really nice thing for them to be able to check the box and know that it was thought of at the point that that building was renovated or built out of the ground. So it's still there, and I'm glad that it's table stakes. It should be, and I think we should keep pushing for more of that. But I think definitely in our market, it's just understood that that is something people want, even if it's not the first thing that they articulate in their wish list.
Lauren, this has been a great conversation. I'm wondering, is there anything that we missed that you'd like to share or that we should be talking about?
No, I would just invite your audience to continue pushing for change and to stay curious and to hopefully find opportunities for experimentation in their own workplaces.
Lauren, I know you're busy, so thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. I think there have been a lot of great ideas and insights, so thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.